Hello, Soul Spiralers. Welcome back to today's episode. Today I have Marcus Vinicius here with me. I'm very, very excited to have him here. He is a yoga teacher and he focuses on coaching others through using the yoga and tantra system. He's also very philosophical and I have had the pleasure of experiencing his teachings in class. So I'm very, very grateful that he's agreed to come with me on this podcast today. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Mark.
Thank you for having me, Kristin. It's an honor.
Oh. Super special. Usually the way that I start this off is I pass it right over to you because I want to know, and what our listeners want to know, a little bit more about your story, and if you're happy to share what has allowed you to become the person that you are sitting in front of me today. And I know part of that's a big aspect of going on this path through
absolutely
discovering yoga.
Okay. I grew up in a completely different country. We're in Australia. And my culture is very different. It's the Brazilian culture. I was born in like many, in a dysfunctional family with a lot of violence, a lot of chaos. And yeah, I think my whole life, I always been a thinker. I would spend too much time alone. And entering my teenager times, I started to experiment, I just went nuts, really, like many.
Yeah.
With the exception of the violence that I suffered, which was really intense, nothing's really too different than many people. We come from our parents, they do what they can, right? We all get out of childhood with that sense of inadequacy that we have to do something in order to feel good and to be good and to be accepted. I am no different. I left childhood and my teenager years and I've been profoundly impacted by some members of my family. I've had the fortune to have half of my family is pretty much illiterate, really. Wow. They can't really read or write them well. Yeah. They're not. Yeah. And the other part of my family, they're all like intellectuals and academic people. So it's a very intense contrast. And I've been profoundly impacted by the intellectual side of my family, my father's side. And my aunties, they were these revolutionary people that were like very intelligent and studied so much and could speak languages. And I've always took them as my main reference. And my interest in philosophy started as a teenager, really. I was suffering from severe depression. I found that I started reading a book about the philosophy encoded in the movie Matrix. And that was really the beginning of it all.
Yeah.
Right then.
Sounds like a journey, that book.
Yeah,
itself.
It was definitely. And it was when I had my first contact with Buddhist and Hindu teachings and yogic teachings. And not only that, like Plato, Socrates, again, I can't really pronounce those names in English. I rarely have to speak about those things in English. Yeah. So that was the beginning of everything. And then one day I found yoga. My auntie, she was my main influence. I was a pretty violent person. And I went through this very, very dark period where I was like, I was a danger to myself. And she was like, look, you have to do something about it. Otherwise, I'm going to put you in a clinic.
Wow.
So you're going to do yoga. You're going to go to these yoga classes. And I'm like, okay. I did not know what.
Yeah.
She actually taught me some breath works when I was, 6, 7 years old. I never really thought too much about it. And then I jump into those classes and I hate every second of it. I hated the fluffy voice, the calmness. It was so different for me. Mm-hmm. And one day I decided to just not go anymore and go back into the wheel of suffering and then found martial arts. That was the thing that actually brought a lot of my fire down a bit, under control, until one day I I hurt myself pretty bad. I was training with the hopes of getting in the Olympic team for Taekwondo at the time. And in one tournament, I hurt myself really, really bad, and I could not walk for a while. And suddenly everything that I had there to control this fire, it was gone. And it's that thing. I got way worse than I was before. I got way more dark and way more depressed and way more unsatisfied with life. And only years later, I gave yoga another try, came across this person that told me, you should do a class. And I was like, no, yoga's not for me. Like, I can't deal with that. It's too boring, too whatever. And then I did. I got into it. It was an Ashtanga class, for those who know the Ashtanga, Patabi Joy's Ashtanga style. Pretty intense for a beginner. So I got there, and it was the most magical experience I've ever had, because in 5 minutes I knew, and this is a skeptical person speaking, like in 5 minutes I knew I was going to be a teacher, and I had to become a teacher to bring that as a tool to help others just deal with suffering. In 5 minutes I knew that. I don't know why or how I knew those things, but I just knew. And I did practice Ashtanga for a few more months, but then I delve into just the traditional teachings of the system, which I'm happy to explain more about. But that is that's a summary of my journey to be here.
Thank you for sharing. It's beautiful to witness people's experiences to where they've come and they've come from. It's interesting reflecting. I started coming to your yoga classes after I finished my most recent fast, and I had tried yoga so many times over the years. It's actually like laughable, and everyone would always think, oh, like people would ask me, like, have you done your yoga teacher training? Like, are you, because like I'm just so into, like, probably I didn't realize a lot of the same sort of philosophy is like how I like to live my life in terms of like nonviolence and those sort of aspects. But I just couldn't get into it. And it was funny because
why?
Well, I think I know why. So, and even like my mum used to take me to yoga classes when I was a kid and everything, but I think I had an issue. Well, I know I've had an issue of truly connecting to my breath and being in my body in that space. And through this last fast, I realized that my breath is like really all there is that's most important in this life. And then I came out, and I think the first class that I did with you, you were making us like do deep inhales and exhales, like the whole class. I found it. I understand yoga. Or I just like all of a sudden like, oh, I know I want to do this. Like this feels so good and so right to my body. And it was just because it was just all about the breath in that moment.
It's all about the breath.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. And so I think that's why your teachings really like spoke to me. Yeah, this is what I wanted. It being all about the breath, to work through my shit with not being able to be with my breath. And here it was like staring right at me in that way. And maybe you can share a little bit more about how you weave the type of yoga that you do, because I know it's tantric hatha yoga is the type that you teach. Yeah. What is that in difference to like Ashtanga or whatever? And why did you feel like that's where you've landed in your teachings at this point in time?
Well, I guess it goes back to my story, right? There is a misconception that yoga is about the body and about it. There's two narratives that play out the most, and they're most dominant. And one of them is the amount of flexibility you have to have in your body, or fitness, or what they call these days flow. I'm going to do a flow class.
Yeah.
And that's purely physical. And there is also the narrative that is, oh, a true yogi is someone who's renunciate, someone that goes into a cave and stays there for like years,
like a monk.
Yeah, a person that really pushes away the world and goes and lives in the mountain in isolation. The first one is probably the least accurate of all. But anyway, the yoga is a set of skills, of techniques that come from a very ancient philosophy. And this philosophy was all about liberation. The yoga comes from these scriptures that are probably the oldest philosophical scriptures known to men.
Yeah, wow.
They were written like thousands and thousands of years ago. So this sage eventually decided to write down the path, map it out for people like us to have access to. And the yoga is one of the three branches that comes to address the mind. And for someone who's gone through the depths of the darkest places ever, like I have, but also at the same time, I had this craving to understand like the nature of my existence and why am I here and why is this happening to me? Like, which is the question that we all ask sometimes, like, why is it happening to me? Almost as if we didn't have any control or
a choice.
Yeah. I've always had these deep questions, and yoga comes to just bring me back to those answers. If you read the sutras, the Yoga Sutras, which were written probably 2,500 years ago, over 2,000 years ago, those sutras, Patanjali is very, very explicit. He speaks about calming the fluctuations, working with the structures and of your mind. So, and then on the third sutra, he says, so the seer abides in its own nature. And I don't know about you, but this to me gives me goosebumps because I'm like, everything that we do is seeking that.
Yeah.
The food, the drugs, the sex, the consumerism, all these things that we at least once got in our lives, got in contact with in our lives, was seeking a deeper connection with something that's greater than ourselves. And the yoga comes with that. And the reason why I teach what I teach is to bring people to that space where they can get in contact with they can calm down a little bit, really feel their breath, really, and help them feel their inner world with more detail and more intimacy. If I could describe a word, really, one of my teachers describes yoga as intimacy, and I could not agree with anything more than that, because it's you become more intimate with your inner reality, and that really reflects on your external reality, your relationships, your the work that you do, your ability to find your dharma, your path, and service to people. It's all through this connection, and yoga is a set of tools. It's a science, really, that really takes us back to home. It's exactly that. So the style that I teach is basically bringing people to that stage through this Patanjali system, which is like the mental side of things, the philosophical sense as well, which is more in the actual Vedic system, but also in the terms of the postures. And I work with the Tantra system because Tantra comes to complement and work with the energy in your body. So the postures are performed in a certain way, with a certain type of breath, in a certain type of space that you have to stay in them for them to have an impact on your energetic body, so that you can then access your mind. Because and you've been to my class, there's no flow stuff, there's no moving from place to place, there's just like static. And you and Alex came to my class right at the transition where I fully stepped into, I was working with this group of people for a long time, and I was making them really still in class. And then so I could eventually work with the tantric system, which is we do implement some movements, but all with intention to access the energetic system. So this is, it's a very long, but it's a short explanation at the same time of why I do what I do.
No, we love the details. That's
okay.
Good. And so in that system, you work a lot with the lunar and the solar energies, and that being in the body, but also in the way that you can enter your practice, is my understanding?
The tantric, in a way, I'm going to try to explain this in a very simple way. In the tantra, in these philosophies, we believe that we have these two. It's the polarity and duality is what actually makes us humans, right? We came from singularity. In the beginning, there's just consciousness, pure consciousness, and then as soon as it enters the body and we take the first breath, the two nadis that this life strings that we have in our bodies, this my teacher called them the silver streams or something like that. The right and left nostril, they feed these two life currents that create polarity, the lunar and the solar side, the creation and destruction, and the masculine and the feminine, the fluidity, and we're all governed by these two. Your right nostril governs your left side of the brain. So the sun and the moon aspects of the tantric practices in the hatha tantric hatha context, they come to work with these two energies, right? So in order to find balance, everything is in order to find balance. So generally what we see is the person that's more fiery, they're always going to want more fire. They're always going to resist calmness and stillness. And the people that are more tamasic, they're more like heavy and like they don't want to move so much. They're the ones doing yin classes. They're rarely the ones actually doing the fiery classes, which is what would bring them back into the sattvic state, which is the balanced state. So the lunar and the solar practices come for that, but also you have the fire practice, which is a more sattvic, a more balanced, So the work that I do with my clients or my students, for that matter, I assess what's needed, and if you need more movement in terms of not the physical posture practice, but more movement in terms of energy in your body, then I will assess that and prescribe a series of, I tend to not to use the word breath work because the word breath work these days is very interesting, but a series of breathing techniques and mudras and postures, but also other practices as well, meditation practices as well, to balance these things out.
Yeah. The reason I was giggling is because I think I'm definitely a very, very feminine being, and I love being in that state. And the yoga I had enjoyed all the time over the years has been yin yoga. So it was making me giggle, but also it was making me giggle because when I think you remember Alex came and asked you one day, like, how can I have more fire in my practice? And he's so in his masculine, he can be very soft and beautifully feminine and very sensitive, but he's such a masculine kind of person that I just was giggling of the fact that he was I
remember
and
that
asking
day
you for more fire. And I was and I'm just wasn't enjoying yoga because I just wanted to be more lunar, let's say. So yeah, I was just laughing on that reflection.
Yeah, and you go to the classes that I teach, they're very kind of sattvic in that sense. They're very balanced because when you're teaching group classes, it's impossible to. One thing that people have to understand is the yoga teachers, they're like Buddha. Buddha thought of himself as a physician. And I think if you really study the system and you practice the system, because studying you become a scholar but not a practitioner. If you really practice it, you understand that you can also be some sort of doctor, because you can look at someone and you can help them see things in themselves that they don't see, and you can help them find balance again. So I teach these practices that are very there's this two energies governing the classes, but my goal is to bring people to a balanced state in the end. So I do have some people sometimes coming to me, how can it be a little bit more fiery? Or
that was Alex.
Yeah, but sometimes it's like, oh, that was so intense.
So fiery.
One time I taught a very fiery class, and he was like, I loved it. That was the best class I've ever been to. And I'm like, okay, cool. But I told him, I'm like, it's not gonna be like that always, man.
I remember that. I think it was like one of the classes after that. It was so fiery, and I was like, wow, that was so intense.
So intense.
And he's like,
yeah. But that is the thing. And you remember my way of being is I get in there, I feel the vibe of the collective, and then I share the philosophy. And then I said to people, I'm like, I'm gonna push you harder today.
Yeah.
And then that was mayhem. People were like, what is going on?
It's like sweat dripping everywhere.
Yeah, but even that sweat, it wasn't really because of the movement, but it's more like we moved very slow, but very like when you slow down really, and you slow down the breath. Yeah. Whew.
That's way harder. Yeah,
it's way harder
going slow.
But people are I think the feedback I had from my classes and the public I managed to gather there really showed me that there is a need. People are craving deeper things.
Definitely.
And they are craving a system that shows them the doors that they can access, you know. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, yeah, those are just ways, I think. I shared the philosophy in the beginning and then in the end, and then I use the asana to balance their energetics, but also give them an insight of their psychology. Yeah. Really allowing them to see their little patterns. In yoga, we call them samskaras, which is like these patterns that we all have in ourselves that govern our actions, really. Mm-hmm. And the whole system of yoga is for us to clear the samskaras, because if we don't work with these tendencies, they become very deep. Mm-hmm. They get stored in our ultra subtle body, and that's the one that takes into another incarnation. So if you don't work on clearing them, you're going to be born again with the same amount of stuff to work.
Who wants that?
I mean, yeah.
Some people maybe,
but
you know.
Some people are like, oh, it's too much effort. I'd rather come back.
Yeah.
I won't remember anyway. It's going to be fine.
How do you feel the aspect of this, I guess the main premise or the main understanding that I have gotten from yoga, and tell me if I'm wrong, because you know, I'm very
it's all fine. Whatever you know is what you know.
Curious and learning is this aspect of non-violence, and that being from the state of towards others, but then also towards ourselves, in terms of if we're in a suffering state, there's a part of us that is creating violence towards ourselves.
Yeah. So Patanjali, this tantric sage, he wrote this series of 190. Some scholars, they say it's 198. Some people say it's 195. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. Nearly 200 sutras in which he presents what yoga is, and the idea of where yoga is going to take you, in the sense of bringing you back home. Yeah. And then in the second chapter, he goes on and gives people practices. Mm-hmm. And halfway through the second chapter, in Sutra 28, 29, he starts speaking about the 8 limb system, mm-hmm. which is called Ashtanga, but it's the real Ashtanga, in the sense that it's the original. Mm-hmm. Ashtanga means 8 path. Yeah. And the first limb, or the first step, is made out of 5 elements, and the very first one is ahimsa, which is the nonviolence. Mm-hmm. So it's very clear that even the idea of non-action, mm-hmm. that a lot of people have this idea of the renunciate that goes in the caves and forests and meditates, and that idea gets debunked right there, because why would he start with actions that you perform in the world? Mm. If your job is to sit and not interact with the world. Mm. So the nonviolence comes, he starts playing with your ability to clear your actions and clean your actions, so you live in more flow. Mm-hmm. And the nonviolence is the very, very first one, and you can see right? Even in that context, how much people go to yoga classes, but they are going there to almost punish their bodies and getting the workout they want. And, you know, but one thing that I do, this exercise that I do with my students, and I taught a workshop on this, I think we have to be very creative with, even with the nonviolence. What does it mean, nonviolence? What can we play with the synonym of that? And I can ask you, like, what is the synonym of that?
Of nonviolence?
Yeah.
Would be the same. Maybe kindness.
So you can practice kindness
and compassion.
Exactly. And in the Sutra 33, he speaks that when you practice the for instance, if you want to really dissolve the violence in you, like it was my case, you have to practice the opposite of that. You know, in neuroscience, there's a term called reciprocal inhibition, which is like if you want to activate your biceps, you activate it, and the muscle that's opposite relaxes. Yeah. So if you practice kindness, violence leaves. But also at the same time, the exercise I do is, what are all the other ways where you somehow are financing violence? You know, I asked my students, I'm like, you know, I spoke about the four major banks in Australia putting their money and investments in coal mining. And that is where the conversation gets very interesting. Yeah. You know, I feel like it's an exercise that also yoga teachers should do, is be a little bit more creative with the interpretation of the teachings. How far can you take them? Violence is in everything. Even if we, you know, don't see, you know, it's where your money is where the restaurant you eat, you know, like everything.
Yeah, so, like if you want to own a mobile phone, you have to be okay with the fact that there's been steel mining that's gone on to
absolutely
have that mobile
phone. And it's exactly. And I was fortunate enough to have teachers that were philosophers, really, and psychotherapists, which is a massive influence on me. And they, one of them said, it's like, you think you're in the information age, you should go to a third world country because your phone operates because of coal mining. So you think you're like, they're all digital. No, if you go to a third world country, you see that it's just not the case at all. They're not on their iPhones because they're mining coal so you can have your phone. And yeah, and this is the amazing thing that Tantra and yoga do, which is they allow us to live in the world without, and I was mentioning to you before we press recording, that I was a very tech person, a geek. I would be like waiting for the next phone and next computer because my work required that at the time. I am so happy I'm not trapped in that anymore. I do have a phone. I do have good things in my house. I do, but I'm not enslaved by them. And I feel like that's the biggest freedom one can have, is like be in the world without being enslaved by the things that so many people get enslaved by.
Definitely. Yeah. And so many people are enslaved by their possessions.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's like Duncan Trussell came with this very good analogy once. Imagine you're a heroin addict and you get in an accident and you wake up in a hospital with amnesia, and you wake up and you don't know you're an addict, but you go on and live your life always feeling the craving of something that you have no idea what it is. You get sweaty, you get restless, you get like, and you feel like there's something there that you're craving, but you don't know what it is. And we are all born in that kind of state. Yeah. As babies, we are born in unity, and we're taken out of that unity because our parents, they teach us like you have to stimulate your senses. So here's a toy, that's a sound, it's a color, it's something, but we're not taught how to go back. So then we go out and live in the world, and we buy the next thing, and and that's the thing. And you buy things, and it gives you that momentary moment of and then what's the next thing now? You know. that is why it's so important that we have practices like that, because when you don't have practices that bring you back home, you're going to anchor yourself in consumerism and buying things to reinforce an identity in the world and prove to people who you are and what you're capable of. And your people don't see you anymore. They see your accomplishments and your possessions in your...
Yeah. Do you think that part of the reason why we find it so difficult to not be consumers in a world where we've come from this aspect of like feeling that unity, and then like you're saying, having that craving, feeling like something's missing, and perhaps we don't have such strong communities in our current society that support us to not fall back on consumerism as a grasping aspect, rather than being so connected with your community that you don't actually crave for those things as much?
Well, look around, and that is a great question. Look around. Everything you have, everything you hear, everything that the system is throwing at you is either with intention, deliberately, to bring you into a space of disconnection, so you keep on feeding the system and working for it to stay alive, or it's an unintentional. It's a byproduct. The disconnection is a byproduct. You know, there definitely the sense of belonging. It's what we're... Look, I'm going to speak for myself in that sense. I have a ridiculous... It's extremely challenging for me to connect with people. It's extremely... I always feel like I'm inadequate. I always feel like I can't really... If I go to social circumstances where I have to, like a dinner, if you were to invite me to a dinner, I would start sweating. And I would come and I wouldn't be able to talk, because even though I want to find community, I somehow, whatever happened to me made me feel like I am not good enough to be in this part of something. And today, since 2009, with the popularization of the iPhone and the internet became so accessible, we are constantly with our faces on this device, comparing ourselves with, and this sense of, I'm not beautiful enough, I don't have enough to offer as a human being, or that person has way more than I do, so therefore I need to work harder. You know, like it all comes with this whole situation that we're in right now. It's a byproduct of the system that we live in. You know, it's which is again back to where I do what I do the way that I do, because I want people to be closer, because I want the things that I crave the most, I want people to have them, even if I myself struggle to access them too. So yeah, I feel like I could say way more to this, but I feel... Did I answer your question at all?
Definitely. I mean, I think that you're attributing to the fact that even though sometimes we find it hard to find our truth in who we are showing up with in community, the more that we can be in those spaces like you're creating, the more that we can actually find that it's okay to be in that truth.
Absolutely. But also that everything that we have around us is actually pushing us further into disconnection and out of the community. You know, our fences are getting taller and thicker, and we don't know our neighbor's name anymore, and we don't say goodbye to good morning or good evening to a stranger on the streets anymore. So everything is telling us to be afraid of the unknown, and the person next to you is a threat to you. So everything around is pushing you further into that sense of disconnection, out of community, for sure.
How can yoga bring us back to the community?
Look, if we understand that everything that you do, look, everything happens in conditions. Everything. I speak in a certain way. I act in a certain way. My ability to connect or disconnect or speak or whatever comes from my upbringing, my life, everything that also, which means conditions are the things, right? If we start the yoga comes with a set of tools to help us recondition ourselves and get closer to these patterns of these deep psychological things that we all have that are generating the sense of disconnection. You know, there is in neuroscience now, not now, but for the past, I don't know, 5 years, became this recently discovered area of the brain near the default mode network is this part right behind the frontier of your brain. And it lights up when you are distracted, and it lights up when you're distracted. And in that lighting up, or that activity being increased in that area, what they found is that it increases your sense of separation. They did a study where these guys from Harvard, I believe, they didn't have enough funding. So what they did was they created an app, and people downloaded this app across the globe. And they would send random messages to these people saying, what are you doing right now? And they would classify what they were doing. And they were like, how are you feeling right now? Are you happy, discontent, whatever? And 47% of the time, people were distracted or not in the present moment. And they found out that these people, 47%, were unhappy in that moment. So that is a very good insight on how the mind works. When you're distracted, you are not in your body, you're not in your life, you're outside, you're comparing, you're judging, you're time traveling. And that sense of disconnection is addressed purely by you coming back into stillness and feeling your own life more intimately with a series of practices that will help you to act in society, practices that will help you to act in your inner world, like the niyamas. And then you have the physical practices to help to bring your body and energetic body out of into alignment. The pranayama, which is helping you to kind of just work with your energy in a lot more detail, so you can access some sense of concentration and stillness, and then eventually get into states of meditation. The promise is that you find you're home after those steps. So that's
I love that.
Yeah,
it's such a beautiful description.
And that is all in the second half of the second chapter of the Yoga Sutras for those who want to kind of have a look.
Wow, we're only on the second chapter.
Yeah, that's only the second chapter. And the third chapter, things get crazy.
But I really love that reminder of it's this aspect of coming home to yourself, and in coming home to yourself and into stillness, you find that connectedness, and you realize that we can bridge the gap between this separatedness, let's say, that we live in such a world that strives for that. And it's like within that crazy chaos of that experience that we're all living in different forms, we can come back and find that stillness. I really love that.
Yeah. And you know, like just one more thing. We really have to stop once and for all with the idea that yoga is about inaction, because there is that path indeed. In Mahabharata, where the Bhagavad Gita comes from, Krishna has this conversation with Arjuna, and they're in the battlefield. And just to give an overview for the listeners, Krishna is guiding Arjuna, who happens to be the greatest warrior of all time. And Arjuna is in this dilemma because he has to go to war against people from his family. So he's in that dilemma where he's learned all that kind of yoga, and he doesn't understand why he would have to go to war then. Isn't everything about peace? Isn't everything about not creating karma and all that? Krishna says to him, yes, that there's definitely the path of inaction, but I'm here to bring, in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he speaks about bringing back the path of action. And where Arjuna, if you are the greatest warrior of all time, it's your dharma to fight for what's right. So if it's your dharma, you got to do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a world like we're living, it's very easy to be like, yeah, I'm not going to take action. I'm not going to, you see injustice, but you don't want to create harm, or you want to avoid conflict. You want to avoid the heat, and you just don't do it. And I feel, and the teachings are there. Yes, there's definitely the path of inaction, but Krishna really instructed Arjuna to, if you're a warrior, you gotta act. So if it's in you to build community and to bring people together, do it.
Yeah.
Do it. I don't know why I got there, but yeah.
I think it's that reminder of like, sometimes that coming home to yourself isn't just stillness. It isn't just that inaction. That's what you were saying. Sometimes that coming home to yourself is actually the action you take in your day-to-day life.
Because again, like, how many people do you come across, do you encounter that don't know what their path is?
Yeah, or they're like, or they do know, and they're like, oh, but I don't know how to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And that self-doubt, that is exactly what the Bhagavad Gita, one of the interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita is that conversation that Arjuna is having, the dilemma of what do I have to do in my life, was actually a way that they thought to just illustrate the moments in our lives where we don't know what to do with ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's a side of us that's telling us to do one thing. There's the other side that's telling us to do something else. And in the end of the day, the distraction that we're victims of stops us from actually understanding who we actually are. Yeah. Remember, the Sutra 3 says once you find that stillness in the mind, the seer abides in its own nature. So once you tap into your own nature, you understand what your dharma is, your path is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're going to action it right away, but with these practices of building enough, like you and again, finding community support systems, not in one single culture that I'm aware of, people do stuff alone.
Yeah.
There's always, like in the indigenous cultures, there's always a shaman, there's always a curandero, there's always like someone that's there. The elderly were the ones back in the day helping the community, So yeah, it's the more we find stillness and we understand the reality of our own conditioning, it's more palpable, the idea that we can actually tap into our dharma, understand what we're here to do. And if it's maybe you're not a warrior, maybe you're a gardener, and that's your dharma, and that's what you're here to do. And you're gonna do that in the most beautiful way, because it's your soul's purpose,
Yeah, so beautiful.
I think it's beautiful too. It's a beautiful system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have some questions for you, Marcus.
Cool.
What's your star sign, moon, and rising? You and I love astrology.
So. I'm Sagittarius sun, Pisces moon, and rising. Yeah,
you've got so much Pisces in that philosophical aspect of yourself.
The shamans.
I always think you're a Pisces.
The shamans of the zodiac.
Do you know your human design?
I think I'm a generator.
Okay, cool. I don't really know what that
means. Which
means.
I have no idea what it means.
We had a human design.
I had someone telling me I am that, so.
You just can keep going. Often.
When you don't know who you are, you just listen to people.
What's your favorite fruit?
Passion fruit.
Ooh,
it's maracuja in Portuguese.
Maracuja.
Yeah.
Is that how you say it?
Maracuja.
Maracuja.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's such a good. When you get a good passion fruit, like
good passion fruit. In Brazil, the passion fruits are this big.
Wow, that's like
they're massive,
humongous. Yeah, they're it's like the grapefruit size.
Yeah.
If you could return to one moment in your life and re-experience it again, what would it be?
Wow. I don't know.
You don't know?
I'm torn, because there's moments where I wish I could hug my grandparents again.
Yeah.
There's moments where I feel like I would go back to, I feel like I would go back to a place where I could hug my grandparents again.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Would you choose the forest or the ocean?
Ooh, that is a hard one. Well, right now I'm leaning towards forests.
Yeah, there's natural waterholes in the forest.
I live by the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, so
literally.
Yeah, you're so close. Hey, is there a certain plant or flower or herb that you work with the most?
No.
Yeah, nothing. Do you have a favorite?
They're not listed. So I can't
That's okay.
say.
People have said some great things on here. What's your favorite crystal?
The selenite.
Nice. Moon energy. Love that.
Yeah. I love the tiger's eye.
Yeah.
The red one. Is that the red?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Red tiger's eye.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. That one has a special place in my heart. But
yeah.
The selenite has been calling my attention in my home for the past 2 weeks, and I don't know why. So
it's kind of like the tiger's eyes for your Sagittarius and the selenites for your Pisces.
Yeah, it was actually my healer that gave me a selenite sword. Yeah, it was a beautiful moment. Yeah,
beautiful. Do you have a spirit animal? Or if you're an animal, what would you be?
I think I would be a tiger.
Yeah.
Don't know why.
I see it.
Yeah?
I see the tiger.
Cool.
There's so much like philosophical talks with the mentioning tigers and things like that as well, like especially in like Zen philosophy. I know there's lots of stuff around.
Well, now it's interesting because you just reminded me that in Chinese astrology I am a tiger.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
There you go. I'm a horse.
You're a horse. Cool.
I'm a fire horse. Apparently it's the most difficult.
I can see that.
Amazing. This has been such a beautiful conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. It was really lovely.
Yeah, it's really flowed and I've had so much fun with you, and yeah, I'm excited to hear what people think. If people want to get in touch with you or connect with you more, what's the best way that they can do that?
Oh my God. Yeah, that's the thing that one of my teachers were like pressuring me to 2-3 days ago, like, Marcus, you have to kind of just build a website. And I'm like, yeah, I think people can find me on Instagram. I feel like that's the easier way. They just send me a message, and if they are interested in connecting, either to build community or to discuss the ideas that were shared here on this podcast, or do work with me on a private, whatever. Yeah.
Because you offer coaching and
I do offer these services, which I only picked it back up now, and I also am teaching classes in my own little space that you get to see on Monday when we get together again. So
if you're in the Sunshine Coast,
if you're in the sunny coast, I'm just offering small group classes in my home, in my living room, which is pretty small. So these are the things that I'm offering at the moment.
Amazing. Sounds perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kristin. Thanks for having me.